Hi there, friends and humans and all ships at sea. I'm going to do something a little different on this vlog because I noticed that my blog, which if you were Japanese you probably wouldn't hear the difference between those two because they tend to get their V's and their B's confused, so they wouldn't know the difference between a vlog and a blog. So if you're Japanese, listen up. I'm going to do something different on this one because I noticed that my blog is running kind of weird, like kind of slow, and I can't really seem to I was able to update it, but only by logging on several times and finally getting it. And when I looked at it, the picture that I put with it didn't show up, and none of the pictures are showing up, and everything is kind of screwy. Now, I have a slight paranoia because I noticed that I am now on the radar of the types of people who don't want opinions that they disagree with to be heard. so I don't know if I've been hacked or what, but I think that possibility is very slight. I think it's probably just yet another problem that I've been having with this blog since it began. So maybe we'll get that cleared up, but because of that, what I'm going to do is read to you the blog. That's Adriana. I'm going to read to you the blog that I wrote and into this YouTube thing. So let's see how that works. The title is Zen and Identity Politics, or vice versa, Identity Politics and Zen. A Zen master once said, "When you eat breakfast, you become a breakfast eater. When you take a shit, you become a shitter." Identity is a topic of great concern in Zen Buddhist philosophy. One way of understanding the Zen take on things is that it often boils down all of our problems in life to a simple case of mistaken identity. Once our identity confusion is solved, we can start to be happier. This is not an uncommon premise for a religion in India. A lot of them claim that we are mistaken about who we are and that if we recover our true identity, everything will be cool. In those other Indian religions, the goal is usually to replace the identity you have now with a different identity. After Carlos Santana became a devotee of the Indian guru Sri Chinmoy, he used to put one of Sri Chinmoy's favorite sayings on the back of his records. "I am not this body, I am the spirit soul that flies within." Note, when I went looking for this online, I couldn't find it, but I swear to God I remember leafing through Santana albums and seeing that quote on the back of some of them, so there you go. The Hare Krishna people changed their names to new ones that all mean eternal servant of Krishna. Thankfully, Krishna has a lot of identities, so not everyone ends up with the same name. What they do end up with is a name, one of the alternate names of the thousands of names of Krishna, and Das if they're a man, and Dasi if they're a woman, because which always translates to servant of Krishna. So if you ever meet a Hare Krishna devotee and he says, "My name is, etc., etc., Das," it means servant of Krishna. Some forms of Christianity also see one of life's goals as becoming born again and establishing a new identity as a servant of God or of Christ. Buddha agreed with this notion that our root problem is mistaken identity. He just didn't think the solution was to establish a new identity to replace the mistaken one. When practicing Zazen, it is possible to actually watch the way our own identity ebbs and flows. Some practitioners report the feeling that they are dissolving. Dogen often used the phrase dropping away body and mind, shinjin datsuraku, to describe this. Even if you're not dissolving, often you find yourself switching through multiple identities as you sit there quietly. This is a phenomenon a lot of us have when doing Zazen, and we'll talk about that. This can be disconcerting, and I say this because I find it disconcerting. I often found it highly disturbing to spend several hours quite literally not knowing who or what I was. And I don't mean that facetiously or as an exaggeration or something. You'd be sitting there, or I'd be sitting there, in a temple somewhere, especially on sesshin and things, long form sittings, not knowing who I was, completely not knowing who I was, and that's scary. More than a few times it freaked me out bigly, to quote Donald Trump. I'd give up Zazen for a week or a month because I couldn't stand the sensation of losing myself. And that's true. That's one of the ways I coped with Zazen, which may be of use to some of you who might be freaking out, is I just quit for a little bits of time. Always went back to it, but sometimes I'd even mark my calendar and I'd say, well, from here to here, no Zazen. And then the next day I can start doing it again, just to kind of try to manage the speed at which it was going, the process was going. When you replace one identity with another identity, at least you still have an identity. But asking someone to let go of their identity and then to resist the urge to replace it with something else, that's tough. No one can manage it at first, and I mean no one. Not Buddha, not you, not Bodhidharma, nobody, not Dogen, forget it. It takes perseverance and a kind of dogged determination. It also helps to have someone around who has done this stuff longer than you and can demonstrate that one can do this and still come out reasonably okay. This is where having a teacher can be useful. Now, the reason I didn't say teacher in the blog is because it doesn't have to be an established, credentialed Zen teacher or something like that. You can just be somebody who's done the practice a little bit longer than you. That can also be helpful. So, if you can find that can be useful to your practice. But what is identity anyhow? Lately, a certain faction has emerged who believe that society has an obligation to accept and affirm whatever identity an individual has chosen for him, her, them, them, hum, per, thon, ver, jem, yo, hir, mer, jim, self. And that's a reference to Wikipedia's entry on special pronouns. But is this actually how identity works? For example, is Brad Warner an enlightened Zen master, or is he a transphobic piece of shit who should never have been given a set of Buddhist robes? Or is he the bassist for Zero Defects, which is his preferred definition? Is he white, as most people assume, or is he of mixed race, which he knows to be true given his family history? Is he an angry, rebellious punk, like in his books, or is he kind of a goofball, as he often comes across in person? What I think I am is often at odds with what other people think I am. Who is right? Is it useful to try to make everyone I encounter agree with the identity I have chosen for myself? Should there be a law requiring them to see me the way I see me? Or is that just a lot of wasted effort? I'm asking these questions, not providing answers to them. Whenever I was unsuccessful at convincing someone else to see me the way I saw myself, I felt a terrible need to fix the situation. This often proved impossible, and so I was left wondering if maybe I really was whatever they said I was, and if maybe I was in fact wrong about myself. For me, the first step towards a more Buddhist sort of understanding of identity was seeing how much of a waste of effort it was to try to convince others to see me the way I saw myself. The next step was to see how much effort I was wasting in trying to convince myself that I was who I thought I was. This is where the Zen practice started to get really tough. I started to see the ways that I was constantly trying to redirect and refine my own thoughts to keep them in line with a specific identity. When I let go of all that, all sorts of unsavory thoughts got let loose to run around in my brain. Suddenly, every racist thought I'd ever suppressed came rushing to the surface. Every violent thought, every vile and disgusting desire, every weird and twisted idea that I could barely even comprehend, they all started showing up and demonstrating to me in unmistakable ways that I was not the identity I had spent so much time, effort, and energy establishing. I started doing Zazen in my late teens. This is a time in everyone's life when establishing an identity takes on a kind of urgency. So questioning the very concept of identity at that age is especially problematic. On the other hand, Starting when I did may have had some advantages in that there was comparatively less to dismantle, but it sure wasn't easy. Now, when I say there was less to dismantle, I mean there was less to dismantle than if I'd spent 40 or 50 years establishing an identity and then tried working on going beyond it. It doesn't mean that I wasn't pretty strong in my sense of self already, in my, false sense of self, because I was. What happens when you do this? You'd think you'd just turn into some kind of amorphous, identityless blob. But I looked at my teachers, and it was clear that exactly the opposite had happened to them. Both were very strong and clear in their personalities, but there was a naturalness to the way they manifested themselves that no one else I'd ever met seemed to be able to have. They were unconcerned with knowing who they were. Rather, they simply were who they were. That's an important distinction. Knowing who you are means kind of formulating it into an object. Just being who you are doesn't require very much work at all. You just kind of do it. You don't become an amorphous blob. A lot of people I see at Zen centers seem bound and determined to turn themselves into the most amorphous, unopinionated, lifeless sort of blank slate possible. They'll walk around and they'll talk like this with this kind of smile and this kind of little voice. And it's really annoying because that's just another kind of self you're establishing. That's another identity that you're taking on, the identity of the amorphous non-self. Rather, being who you actually are, it requires a lot less effort. It's a lot easier, actually, when you get the hang of it than trying to be that amorphous blob. I know this because I've tried to be that amorphous blob. You guys just didn't see it, so you think I never went through that stage. But trust me, believe me, as Trump says, I did. These days, identity has become politicized. As a minor public figure, I've seen people become obsessed with defining my identity and therefore my politics. Those of you who follow me on Facebook may have seen the appearance of a few people there trying to pin me down as an enemy of progress because I have not been sufficiently vocal about my misgivings about the current president and his policies, which I do have a lot of them. I just don't like to talk about it all the time. If they can identify me as a bad person spreading evil ideas, then the uncomfortable things I sometimes say can be ignored. That response is understandable, and I want to point out here something I cut out of the original article, in that I did that. When my teachers would make me uncomfortable, I would try to frame them as somehow bad or unworthy people in my mind, the end game being so that I didn't have to listen to that uncomfortable stuff they said about identity and all of that. I didn't consciously realize that's what I was doing, but in retrospect, that's exactly what I was doing. Because if I could make Nishijima Roshi into an evil person because he had politics I disagreed with, which I wrote about in my blog before, a month ago or so, then I didn't have to listen to him. I didn't have to do this practice because he was an evil guy, and I can't practice the practice of an evil guy. So it was very useful, but it never really took for me because I could see that I was bullshitting myself. Buddhist philosophy is very difficult. It identifies one of our most precious possessions, our sense of self, as the source of our misery and the root of the world's most threatening problems. It says that the only way we'll ever be happier is if we give up who we think we are. Doesn't that mean I can never be happy because there would be no I who could experience happiness? The answer is surprising, because it surprised me. You don't need to be you in order to be happy. In fact, you are happiest when you stop being you. We all experience this when we lose ourselves in a great movie or a great YouTube video, or in creating a great meal, or in sex, or in sports, or in whatever activity does it for you. It can happen in Zazen as well, often in a way that transcends the loss of self those other activities sometimes produce. It's kind of an interesting thing because it's like that experience of kind of losing yourself in a movie or a song or whatever you lose yourself in, or sex, magnified, like the mega version of that. It can be pretty intense and sometimes pretty hard to take because of the intensity of it. We are all different. We're all unique. We are all, dare I say it, special snowflakes. That's true. But identity is only one small aspect of that. In fact, it's so unimportant that we can learn to simply ignore it most of the time. Of course, there's some times when, like, the cop says, "What's your name?" and you gotta go back into identity. But you can ignore it most of the time and still be pretty much okay. That's where the blog ends. If you'd like to continue this discussion, you can put a comment down below. I don't get loads of comments, so I can usually respond to all of them. And also down below is the link to my blog, if it works, my Patreon page and YouTube donation stuff. It's all down there. Take a look. Buy my books, buy my audiobooks. That makes me happy. And see you next time. Thanks.